Hey, what's going on, guys? This is In the Room with Communitas North America, and I'm James. We've got a full house right now. We've got Leon, Mike, and Bethany. And we just hope that these events serve as an opportunity to start making a little bit of a relational connection with all of you, and maybe paint a picture of what Communitas is, what we're about. We also really hope that this is a space where we're just encouraged and inspired to be creative about what church and mission can look like in our present context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've already, like James mentioned, we have, again, Mike and Bethany with us talking about some of the practicals or some of the practices that we use in Communitas, particularly the dynamic adventure guide that we use. And we'll just kind of maybe recap a little bit for people that didn't see 6 weeks ago. But, 6 weeks ago, we talked about embedding and initiating, and then we're going to talk about practicing and maturing this time around. But just going back to that embedding and initiating, maybe could one of you give us a 2-sentence each, definition of embed and initiate?
Sure, absolutely.
Yep.
At the end of the day, embedding and initiating is kind of the beginnings of the practice of incarnational ministry. In John 1:14 in the Message translation, it says that the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood, and that's kind of our model. Even to the point of when Jesus said in John 20:21, it is right, as the Father sent me, so I'm sending you. We take that as a model to be physically, spiritually, emotionally with a neighborhood, deeply immersed in it and curious about it, for the purpose of really blessing the neighborhood, being with it and enriching it.
The way that could I add a little bit?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So when I think of describing embed specifically, I think of everyone on a team acting as a missionary in context and really living that missional lifestyle out on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. And when I think of initiating, I think of taking what is being learned in the embedding process and deciding and discerning with each other what they want to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Definitely.
Great.
Well, I thought it would be, Mike, I don't want to interrupt you. You got something?
No, that's fine. Go ahead, James.
You saw his mouth open a little bit. Right?
Exactly. Let's move forward, not back.
I thought it would be helpful before we start this, as we start this conversation, to just start with a working definition of church. When you guys want to tackle
we
that?
Certainly can.
I love this question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and because even as we say in the guide, what comes to mind when you think about church, it means an awful lot. In some contexts, church means the building on the corner, or some specific denomination or strain of Christianity or something. But that's not what we mean in that sense by church. We define church as a community in which life transforming communion with God takes place, a community in which whole life community with one another takes place, and then life-giving mission in the world takes place as core elements. Those things are going to look different for everyone and for all different forms of churches, depending on context, neighbors, who are the people that comprise the church. But we really want to think about the functions of church and this community relating to God and each other and the world in meaningful and intentional ways.
I like that.
I do too. I think it's one of the distinguishing things about Communitas, is that we are very clear about what we consider church. And when those three things that Mike talked about are happening, we call it a church. And so it may not look like a traditional, it may not look like what we're used to. And yet we can affirm those three things are happening. You are God's community, you know? And so I think that is great. And I love that about Communitas.
And those three primary elements, you know, they're very large buckets too, you know, and
Right.
so folks are like, well, what about worship? Well, that's communion with God, you know. What about studying the Bible? What about preaching? You know, again, all of that can look different and ought to look different depending on the church, the folks who comprise that church. Some folks, for example, are, I mean, I know there's instruction to preach the word, right, in Scripture, for sure. But, you know, just what that looks like and how we interact with Scripture together, communally, corporately, that could look very, very different and ought to, depending on who is part of the church. Absolutely.
Do we want to take just 1 second to like do quick definitions of communion, community, and mission?
We certainly can.
Yeah.
Sure. You want to start, Bethany, or
do I want to start?
well, you can start too.
I want to hear James's. What's community? Yeah.
Exactly.
Wish I had a whiteboard.
This is adult learning. You just turn the question around and ask, you know.
Just like bullet points. Communion is how we relate with God. Community is how we relate with each other, like within the faith community. And mission is about how we're relating with the world around us. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Certainly. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well done. Okay, next question for you, James.
Here, let me get it.
Could you define practice for us, James?
So we were talking about these 6 dynamics that are like just very important to like how we do church together at Communitas, and they're like the dynamics are like showing up in a lot of our conversations. I want to know, are these 6 dynamics like a roadmap to church planting, or how do we perceive the 6 dynamics in dynamic adventure?
Sure. I think we have a thing of who should answer, Bethany or I or both, and we're deferring to one another. I think, politely. It's not that we don't know, you know. It's not that we don't have an answer for you. We're like, come on, because I'm like,
I can open it up.
By far, absolutely.
And then I'm going to totally pass it.
Okay.
Because I don't think that we would use those exact words as it's a route to church planting. I think, Mike, what words would we use?
They comprise an approach to church planting, but not necessarily a roadmap. The dynamics really come as a result of observing the characteristics of healthy and sustaining and reproducing churches. You know, a long time ago, as part of Communitas has been thinking about this for a really long time. And so we've continued to build on the work over time. But yeah, we were looking at our projects and other projects in the church planting world and saying, which are the ones that seem to be surviving and thriving, you know, in all the right ways. And so those characteristics became ultimately the dynamics. They're the churches that are continuing on a continuing basis, embedding well into their community. You know, they're diving deep in there, or as we say in like one of the chapter headings, they've moved in and they're living it out. You know, like that's what they're doing. Those are absolutely, you know, essential characteristics of a church that's going to be fruitful on mission. You have to do that. practice, mature, hub, extend, all of those are things, those are behaviors, those are characteristics that we have observed in churches that do those, that are ultimately sustainable and fruitful. So it's not a roadmap, and we diagram it out as kind of a Celtic knot. And so wherein there's no beginning and there's no end, and all the loops kind of tie to one another, and it's just this continuous sort of pattern of going out, coming in, going out, coming in, going through the middle, which we would suggest is our community and the Holy Spirit helping us to discern as we go out and embed, and we come back, we think about initiating, well, what should we do, folks, and all that. So it's not a roadmap, but it's definitely a series of characteristics or behaviors, perhaps, if when they become practical, they're behaviors that will certainly help the effort. Okay, it's not a recipe. It's more like, if you just add these ingredients or a map from here to there, it's not that in any way, but it's a like we say, it's a guide. For example, the dynamic adventure. These are milestones or mileposts to look for on the journey, and potentially circle back to, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's actually very helpful, because I know when I interact with people, sometimes that's what they're expecting from us.
Sure.
It's like this step-by-step process you follow, or they don't want that and they assume that's what we're going to give them. And I'm like, no, it's not that type of a thing.
Well, I'm sorry, Leah.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and we do want to emphasize that planting a church on a missional platform is different than other kinds of church planting.
Yeah.
And we call it a dynamic adventure on purpose, because we really do feel like it's an adventure. You're never quite sure what's around the next bend. And it's very much a non-linear process. Or in the early days, as we were thinking about this language in Communitas, we actually called it our church planting progression. And we said, you know what, it's not really a progression, maybe kind of sort of the first time you do this, like I'm moving to Paris or Sioux Falls, and I don't know a thing about it, so I better start embedding. Yes, that's true. But it doesn't mean once you've done embedding, you'll never do it again, right? It's a nonlinear process. And it's not a progression in a like map, sort of like take Route 66 from here to there, and then you're done. It's that Celtic knot metaphor is really what it's about for us.
I think that gets at a question that we talked about asking, and just like, if you're talking about the reality that these are good things for the church to be involved in throughout its life. It's not like we get involved in our community with an agenda of starting a church. Our churches should be deeply rooted in our communities because we love our communities. And that doesn't stop when at like some point.
Right. Exactly. No, that's absolutely true.
That's good. That's good. It kind of takes away the whole bait and switch type of thinking that sometimes gets mixed into it. But we're gonna get involved and we get to know the community so that we can get our results that we want, or we can get the crowd type of thing. That's
classic Al Hirsch stuff, that about extracting folks from their culture into our Christian culture, and never to, and then you lose that sort of connection to the host culture, and so on and so forth. And ideally, like in Communitas, I mean, one of the things when I talk to people about what Communitas is about, and they're North American folks, with perhaps a lifetime of church experience, I learned that I first had to say, imagine that you wanted to start a church where there are very, very few Christians. So like, first you have to do the work of relationship building, then you have to do the work of discipling, and then the church ought to raise out of those folks. Mm-hmm. And so you can't have an agenda, right? You can't have the ultimate picture in mind, because you don't know who God's going to send you. You don't know who those co-followers are going to be and what their passions and interests and gifts and talents and all that's going to be to live out a kingdom life in that community. You just don't know. So, that's kind of a hard thing to grasp. And it's so different for us who kind of like, well, of course they're Christians. Wherever I go in the United States, they're Christians. For example, open a better church or a good church and people will come. We're very used to in Communitas. Well, okay, first I have to make a friend, and start all the way from that spot. And you just sort of can't have this final picture in mind. And in fact, that's a perfect segue, if you will, to practice and mature, because that's what some of this stuff is about.
And I think that's what, when we talk about practice, maybe just give us a quick, what do we mean when we talk about practicing within Communitas?
Do you mind if I just read a little bit from the Dynamic Adventure?
That'd be great.
Oh, you could. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let me make sure I can see it all the way on my screen before I start reading. Otherwise, I'll have a break. All right. Because I like this, the way that it's written. So practicing occurs as teams begin to live into a common group identity. So they've been together long enough, right, where a vision, values, maybe a name, what they think of when they think of church, their actual theology of mission, their theology of the gospel, what is good news to this group. Mm-hmm. It also involves experimenting with or testing a discipleship rhythm together to see what practices help the team grow spiritually and communally as they engage in their context.
Cool. Mm-hmm. That's good.
What else would you add, Mike?
I would add that it is, it's about finding an identity, right? It's about trial and error in some ways. Experiment. I like the fact that it's experimenting and testing. Again, based on kind of what I said just a moment or two ago, like we don't know who God's going to send us. And what are their gifts? What are their abilities? What are they coming into this with? What are their needs, etc. And it's developing a communal set of spiritual rhythms and such that make sense for those folks, and in order for them to begin to be a cohesive community of some sort, and also to grow as disciples of Jesus together.
Cool. That's good. What does it look like for a group maybe to transition into that dynamic of practice? Maybe what are some examples of where you've seen practice and maybe even leading into maturing, some good maturing happening as well?
Yeah, where I've seen firsthand practice is prayer, and just praying regularly, maybe praying intentionally, where there's specific types of prayer that the team wants to explore together on behalf of their community. I see Bible study, people coming around just wanting to learn more about who Jesus is, wanting to see God more clearly, and being led into that through the study of God's word. I've seen the service piece where people come around homeless, Leon. Mm-hmm. People, in your case, right?
Right, yeah.
People coming around refugee helps and needs, and whatever that value is for the group. Like we see this need, we cannot ignore it. We want to do something about it. And they come around that on a regular basis, and that does become their identity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mike, what would you add?
It's just this process of slowly working a way toward what are we inviting people toward? Who are we? What do we do, and why is it that we do those things? If we're going to be a community of faith on mission, it could be, just a very small handful of folks, at the beginning, for example. Still in all, what are we offering folks? What are we inviting them toward? We meet some folks. For example, the homeless example. There's, let's just say hypothetically 6 of us as a little team in a city, and we recognize that there are a lot of folks on the street without homes. And we, again, for example, the Spirit has said to us, this is something we can't ignore. And so we begin to do that. We begin to befriend folks. We begin to look for ways to get them shelter and so on and so forth. And inevitably, folks that we're serving will likely ask us why we're doing things, why we care about them at all. I mean, I've had that experience a million times, a lot of times. And there's where we sort of need to be prepared with some of the answers, as it were, because of the love that Christ has for me, and my broken state, or whatever, however you might want to say it. I'm inviting you to experience the same thing. Hey, we know that, for example, you're starved for a relationship. Would you like to be part of our group here? We would like to invite you toward exploring Jesus some more with us, or something like that. I mean, this is very rough stuff to, a roughly painted picture, but it's this whole idea of what are we inviting people toward, what that we're offering folks as and Bethany did a great job of saying, it's because of the embedding and the initiating that we're now needing to practice also, right? What we've seen, how we're responding now is helping us to develop a rhythm of life. Maybe it's, we get together for prayer, for a meal and prayer, and then after that go out and are with our homeless friends for a couple hours in the square, and we just that's what we do every Tuesday and Friday or something, just something that's an intentional yet experimental sort of set of rhythms, spiritual, physical, and otherwise. We're becoming intentional about that, and for the purpose of our own identity as a community, to keep us cohesive. It's not we just do whatever we want because we like each other, but no, we have a purpose and a vision, but also for the benefit of those that we feel called to minister to, right, and invite toward Christ.
I like what in that you talk about identity, and I think, we lost Bethany.
Bethany clearly didn't.
Come back. So anyway, but you talk about identity, and in that, a lot of times we kind of try to, it's like, when I've been in other church planting settings, and it's like, well, you think in your head what your identity is going to be, and then you tell people that's what it's going to be, and you're going to try to become that. And I just know from my own experience with Diakonos when we were in Indianapolis, one of the things I said early on is, or I kind of figured out along the way is, one, we don't create a name until we figure out who we are. Instead of naming a church and picking some standard name, or try to figure out our identity first and then find the metaphor that fits that too.
Absolutely.
I think that was something we learned along the way too. But
and honestly, and that goes like right along with kind of what's in the guide, or in around that practicing and maturing thing is how do we pick a metaphor for who we, as we act this out, as we potentially grow numerically, as a community in some way, whether it's by folks that we're purposefully loving on and serving, or if it's other folks like, wow, that's really cool, I want to do that with you. I'm a Christian too, and I don't have opportunity for that. I want to do that. Grow sort of numerically, this milieu just kind of grows, and then we should start to think about that stuff. But we're finding it out because we're doing it. I think that's the whole idea of the practice thing. And it's not like practice is in batting practice. Like, this isn't real, I'm just going to hit lobs over the fence. It's we're doing this thing, together.
Yeah. That's it. It's true. Yeah. It's true. And it's funny, just observation, moving to a new community now, where probably we'll be doing more embedding and initiating initially. Even with that, like this afternoon, we were at the bank setting up our bank accounts, chatting with the banker, And he's asking, well, what did you do while you're in, like, talking about what's our practice? And he's like, wow, that's really cool. There's this couple I know, I can't remember but he's like, they're doing that down at the park a couple of times. I'm like, oh, that's something I need to know about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, it's just kind of interesting how that all your identity then kind of it can inform your embedding in the future and your initiating in the future too.
Absolutely. No question. Yes.
I would love to give a concise reiteration of some of that. Pick at what I say or add if you want. But I hear a lot of we are in the practice phase. We're figuring out what are our rhythms of life together. What do we do? What are we about? And the other big thing I hear is we're really letting both the inside community and the community that we're embedding amongst inform how we contextualize our practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question.
Sweet.
Spot on. Absolutely.
So then I think the next obvious question, mature. Mature is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and it's our fourth dynamic. And I just it's a word that has a little bit of baggage. What does the dynamic of mature look like?
What does the dynamic of mature look like? What is it about? It's about a number of different things, honestly. You may have to recap it at the end by the time we're done. Hi, Bethany. You're back.
Hi. Sorry about that. Just a glitch. My computer just clicked off. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. It's about growing in depth with certainly with each other as a faith community. At this particular phase, it's about taking a lot of the things that we've learned in that sort of practice through our practicing and beginning to sort of maybe be a little more concrete about it than we might have been before, if that makes sense. If we've learned that we are passionate about this thing, maybe it's time then to begin to say that's what we're about. And maybe to Leon's point, maybe that's when we say, what should we call our church? Because we really we feel God calling us, and we're passionate about this. And so this makes sense for us to assume as an identity, right? It's about sustainability at a number of different levels. And not necessarily primarily financially, but it's about the sustainability of every member ministry. So often, I mean, I don't mean to be critical. A lot of church plants tend to be about the work of one or two people, right? And that person, as valiant as they are, ultimately is just going to have a hard time sustaining ministry over the long term. And some would argue that robs the other 100 people in his or her congregation from expressing their gifts and abilities and talents and passions. So when we talk about mature, what we're advocating for is that sort of this every member ministry thing, where folks are aware of their spiritual gifts and their abilities and their talents and their passions, and they are able to exercise those either within the community of faith or within the neighborhood, at large. That's ultimately sustainable. It's potentially more difficult to do, but it is absolutely more sustainable, and I would argue more effective in many ways. And then it has to do with leadership. Ultimately, a group of folks, sociologically needs to be led somehow, but in some form. it would be hard to just have 50 people just kind of doing whatever they wanted, you know. So and we do believe there are some general biblical guidelines for leadership for sure, and certainly there's different ways to interpret those, but you know, we don't get into that too much. But we would just advocate for a leadership model that works for the community and stays within sort of the covers of Scripture, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are about maturity and what we mean by that, and then probably solidifying over time. Again, what is our vision? What is God? What do we see in you know, God calling us to? What's our kind of preferred future, if you will? What is it that we do, and how do we do it? What are our values? You know, what how do we treat one another? How do we resolve conflict? So all sorts of those kinds of issues that are, you know, they're necessary all throughout this, but as things sort of start to solidify, it becomes more important for sure to be more pay more attention to those things, I should say. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed in the most recent time that I was engaging with the Dynamic Adventure handbook was just like, as I looked at practice and then mature, it seemed like practice, there's a lot of like, oh, we're learning who we are and what we're about, and we're having lots of conversations about that. And mature, I was looking at it just felt like it was describing a community where like the community knows who they are and what they're about. And I hear that a lot in what you're saying, where it's like, it's not just like one or two or three guys up top telling everybody to run in this direction. Like the whole community's passionate about where they are going, and yeah, they're gonna go there even when the leader's not pointing the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At least I think that's definitely a sentiment that I was feeling as I engaged with Dynamic Adventure recently.
I love it. I think that's a distinctor, right, between the two. Of one's experimental still, one's exploring different things in order to achieve maturity. Like, okay, we can claim this, we can step into this, we can be this. Does that mean that we still don't experiment? No, we still do, but there are certain things that have been solidified. The cement has hardened somewhat, and we can walk in that identity and do that with assuredness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's an important thing, right? Because if somebody were to come in with a completely contrarian view of all the community is about, then you've got a way to measure that and evaluate all that. And that it happens a lot, actually. Well, we shouldn't be doing this, we should be doing that, you know, and maybe they're very persuasive, but, you know, so it gives you some earthing, you know, some grounding in who you are and what your call is as a community of faith, you know. It's really important.
I don't want to gloss over that I hear from both of you a lot of like, we are not letting go of the old dynamics as we step into the new. So as much as like in the mature phase, we have a sense of who we are and what we're about, we're still asking that question. And I am assuming that the fact that we're part of the community and we have a pulse on our community is going to continue to shape who we are and what we're about. But I've just heard that said a couple times at different moments, and I didn't want to like let that go unnoticed.
No,
yeah, it's a great double click, because you're right. Yeah, we want that emphasized, because it isn't a linear process that once you achieve one, you get to say goodbye to it and move on to the next. And it's just not, it doesn't work that way. I mean, we see sometimes churches beginning because they're a hubbing of something that was before, right? And then you see practice happening because that's before while they're embedding. the experimenting's happening right even then. And so, I mean, it's just, there's so many variants and variations, I guess, of this Celtic knot. I think it's really well described in that way.
Mm-hmm. And again, these are they're characteristics, right? They're not ingredients in a recipe that you just get. You got to whip the egg white. If you don't get the egg whites right, the whole thing, like you've got culinary training. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They're characteristics of sustainable, multiplying, fruitful churches, right? And so they may be a particular dynamic or two may be more prominent in a life cycle than in another life cycle, and so and others may come to the fore. But no, we definitely don't want to let go of any of them, thinking that we've just passed the test and now it's on to the next thing.
I think one of the things that's really exciting about that is it has the church doing what the church ought to be doing the whole time. Mm-hmm. Like, Leon, did you use this phrase bait and switch earlier?
Yeah.
I feel like there is just sometimes this like, okay, right now we're in this zone where we are not really like doing the thing we're excited about doing, but we'll get there. I feel like the dynamics have the church doing what the church should do the whole time. You're never in that like waiting phase, which is really beautiful.
If you just put up with a serving every Saturday, we'll be done with this soon enough. Like we could just sit comfortably. Exactly.
I think it might be. I just think imagination is so important to like what we're doing, like getting people to think about like, what could church look like in my community? And I think it might be beneficial for that end if we like talked about maybe some examples we've seen of practice in Mature. Do you guys have anything?
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Mike, before
I was going to say, yes, we do.
Oh, these dual interviews, right? They're kind of funny.
Yeah, they are.
So, yeah, I think as we look across section of our organization, definitely there's some teams that come to mind. And we have a team in the south of France who have discovered that they care about the education of the students. And so their practice and maturity is falling into after school programming, and Bible literacy happens there, and a living out of good news of Jesus happens in those interactions and in their loving care and hope for a future for these students. We also see in another team in Spain who the way they practice their identity is worship is about art and dance and music and more. But they are really passionate about those two particular expressions of loving God back in their fine art and dance. When I think of another team in Poland who has fallen in love with the homeless, and they have brought to this community Discovery Bible Study, where everyone is on the same plane, right? Nobody is the expert. Everyone has the Holy Spirit to look at the scripture together and discover what is there. And church has grown from that and has been planted multiple times out of that methodology of dignifying these people. I think of our friends in Russia and the heart that they have for orphans, and what a complex place to try to be help. And what they've discovered is, okay, when they're 18 and out of an orphanage, they're not quite ready to be launched. And so maybe we can come up with a transition home that we can then teach these adults launching life-giving, life-sustaining practices. And so they live in these transition homes, and they are learning life skills. They are shoulder to shoulder with believers, being coached and again, dignified, because now they can say yes or no. Now they can be in or out, and it's their life decision. And just the effectiveness of helping these young adults, right, who didn't have the same background, to launch well into society and into God's kingdom, ultimately.
Just a holistic discipleship, a whole life discipleship, right? In that case.
There you are.
Yeah. So.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think of Leon, you too, and like the practice and mature of your community in Indianapolis, of really coming alongside a problem in the city of homeless camps and trying to find solutions that not only your community, small community in the sense of the church, right, but the larger community, trying to help be problem solvers on behalf of those people and on behalf of your city.
Think of one of our churches in the UK dealing with refugees and asylum seekers and so on, and their rhythms of eating large festive meals together frequently, and just praying and praying and praying and praying together. And how so many folks that are not believers have been drawn to that because of the authenticity of it, and frankly the answers to prayer that have been forthcoming. It's just remarkable. But that's just a communal spiritual practice together that I think it's beautiful, and it's attractive to even those outside of our faith. That they begin to question what is going on with you folks. What is with Jesus, who seems to be answering all of my friends' prayers? It's remarkable.
Yeah. Go ahead, James.
I was just gonna say, I always get so excited when I get to be part of conversations about contextualization. So I just think so often I've been in a relationship with people and been like, I just don't know if the church I belong to is gonna feel like comfortable to you. I remember feeling that lots when I was like working with people living on the streets and just at different times. And this idea that we get to be creative about the expression of church, and when we're creative, there are expressions that these people that we think we might miss will feel like belonging in and love. It's just like, it is an exciting concept. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter.
Right.
Yeah, it's extremely inclusive. It's those three, the communion, community, mission. And that can look very inclusive and very unique.
And practice is so much shaped by the contextualization. It's like, how are we going to do this in a way that welcomes the community that we love, the community that we belong to? Just, Thank you guys for sharing those examples.
Sure. One of the most interesting. We got time for a quick story?
Sure, go for it.
I promise it'll be quick. One of the most interesting and energizing conversations I had was a couple of years ago when our former president Dudley Callison came to New Jersey, and I just invited a bunch of folks that I had relationships with, most of which were substantially younger than me. And we just went and had coffee, and then we sat on the porch of someone's house, and we just said, Dudley said, I had one question. So sit here and dream, what would a church look like that your friends would come to? And there was probably 8 people, and that, me and Dudley and 8 other folks. and the ideas that came out of it were just remarkable. And that's what the kind of creative energy and sort of following God that I think we need to be a movement in the North America and also the world. How do we release that energy? How do we release those dreamers to pursue that without thinking, oh, I have to plant a church. That means I got to quit my job. I got to do sermon prep. I got to do that, and all of the accoutrements of the things that we're used to. Mm-hmm. One guy who's I've lost touch with, but was a friend of mine, is a professional musician. And he's like, I would just have a recording studio that was amazing, and we would just invite anybody and everybody, but it would be a place where we would freely talk about Christ, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I know so many people that would do that. He said, like, I never thought of that. I'm not passionate about that, but his world, that makes a lot of sense, right? Mm-hmm. The other question that was a little less, energizing was, and so why don't you? Why don't you do that? Mm-hmm. And everybody felt like they were waiting for permission from someone, some, phantom out there to say, yes, you can do that. Like, I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's just how we're enculturated or something, but why wouldn't a person who's passionate about recording and is a professional musician, why wouldn't they just try to play with that idea and see what comes of it? Mm-hmm. And all the other examples. That's what it means to build a church on a missional platform in many ways. We often think, at least in my circles, a missional church, that means we need to go and serve the homeless or go to the inner city and do this thing or that thing. And that's not wrong, and it's not bad. And it's important ministry that some folks are absolutely called to do, but that's not necessarily what I'm called to do, or Bethany, or Leon, you are called to do it.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting concept, because I think people assume that what we're going to do here in Minnesota is going to be the same as Indianapolis.
Fair enough.
It may not be. I mean, we got a ways before we're going to figure out what it's going to look like. We have some ideas. We've picked up on a few things already, but
there you go. Fair enough.
Entirely different. Yeah.
However, it is quite clear that you are passionate about that.
And yeah.
It'd be hard to imagine you not doing something like that. But,
yes.
But that to say, I don't know how accomplished of a musician you are, or, this, that, or the other thing. Yeah, you wouldn't be thinking about that.
You can ask my kids about that.
But, so all of these different generative ideas and thoughts that folks have, and, there's, we were connected at one point with a church that was happening in a dog park called Unleashed. Like, how cool is that? Like, like there's so many things that could be, and it all has, and sorry to bring it all back to the same thing, but it's about that embedding. It's about absorbing information about a culture. It's about discerning, needs and struggles and different things, and my own, my or our team's, giftings and passions as well, and how God's calling for those things to intersect. It's a beautiful thing, Mm-hmm. But as we started this conversation, it feels like the future is going to be different than what we are used to,
Yeah, I think so. And we've got a great kind of a basis of now, like the first four dynamics of, embedding, initiating, practice, mature. And we've kind of talked about some great examples of where these things start to work together. Kind of just teasing towards, 4 weeks out when we'll have you guys back again. But like, where does it go from there? I mean, some people are like, hey, we've arrived. We're mature.
Right. Exactly.
Where does it go from there?
Is that a question you want to answer, or you want to leave it as a cliffhanger? Where does it go?
In two sentences, maybe, or maybe a couple of words, whatever.
Okay, how does it not stop with us? Yeah. How does it not stop with us? How, make disciples of all nations, not just the 6 people that we like or the 12 people that God sent us, or whatever. So how does that happen?
Mike,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think you teed that up nicely with your these people feeling like, I don't feel like anyone gave me permission.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's missing is, how do we get that person feeling like they're equipped to go do the thing they're passionate about?
Indeed. Well, and to circle back just a little bit, I mean, that's why part of maturity is everyone operating within their gifting, kind of in their lane, able to pursue, and serve the local congregation of the body and the community, and also the neighborhood. And how do those, some will be sort of within, as we've kind of said it, and lots of others will be outside of. And how do we have a leadership structure that can be okay with that, right? And not just kind of drawing everything into a center, but how do we have leadership that encourages multiplication, right?
That's the word. That's the word.
Multiplication. And in one sense, not to draw too fine a point on it, but a lot of people are kind of content with the addition of people on a Sunday morning or whatever is a service, so to speak, where we count people. But what would it look like to think about multiplying folks and actually maybe losing folks to another church that's starting elsewhere, or another faith community of sorts, proto sort of embryonic thing. So it's the difference between addition and multiplication at some level, and how do we set the stage for that as leadership? How do we, again, those practices, what are we practicing that encourages folks to be risk takers, to feel empowered? I mean, that's all of it. And what is our leadership? How do we lead, and encourage those things to happen for folks who are the apostles and evangelists, to be able to do their thing well, right, and speak into our community, but also outside of the community and catalyze new things, and not feel bad about stop that. You shouldn't be, what's important is, that we do stuff in here. And again, I don't want to be negative and critical, but that's a classic problem, right? That in church growth, sort of the trajectory of a church's growth starts with the more entrepreneurial folks, and then it turns more into a teaching and care situation, and a lot of the entrepreneurial stuff kind of drops off. So how do we keep that active throughout the life of the body and so on?
Well, we'll look forward to going into that a little deeper in about 4 weeks.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. And I don't think we got any audience questions. You want to wrap us up, James?
I can totally wrap us up. I don't know who's. Oh, I do know who's. Guys, I was very encouraged by this conversation. Yeah. If nothing else, I had a great time. Bethany, Mike, thank you for joining us. Anybody who watched, thank you for joining us. If anybody's watching this later, please post questions if you've got them. We want to circle back. And if this can be more of dialogue, we want it to be more of a dialogue. Next week, we actually get to talk with Leon. So
there you go.
This is going to be an interesting show. I switch roles here. I become the guest.
Leon's going to have 2 different hats, and he's going to swap them.
I like that idea. That's a good one.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. What about that? No. We'll work it out. It'll be a great dialogue with James. We'll have fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.